Deep in the ancient libraries of Mesopotamia, carved into tablets that predate the pyramids by thousands of years, lies a collection of texts so extraordinary that mainstream archaeology has spent over a century trying to explain them away. These aren't your typical creation myths or royal chronicles. These are detailed accounts of beings who descended from the stars, established the first human civilization, and left behind prophecies that speak directly to our modern world. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. But here's what they didn't teach you in history class. According to these ancient texts, these weren't gods in the mythological sense. They were flesh and blood beings with advanced technology, interstellar travel capabilities, and a genetic engineering program that fundamentally altered the course of human evolution. And buried within their teachings are prophecies so precise, so eerily accurate about our current technological age, that scholars have quietly removed them from public discourse. Tonight, we're going to explore what happens when you take these ancient texts at face value, rather than dismissing them as primitive mythology. Because what emerges isn't fantasy. It's a historical narrative so complex, so technologically sophisticated, and so prophetically accurate that it challenges everything we think we know about human origins. I've spent the last 3 years diving deep into untranslated cuneiform tablets, cross-referencing archaeological evidence that doesn't appear in mainstream publications, and connecting dots that academia refuses to acknowledge. What I've discovered will fundamentally change how you view both our ancient past and our rapidly approaching future. But before we dive into these suppressed prophecies, we need to understand who the Sumerians really were and why their knowledge was systematically buried by later civilizations. Picture this: around 4,500 BCE, in the fertile marshlands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, human civilizations suddenly exploded into existence. Not gradually, not through slow cultural evolution, but overnight. The Sumerians appeared with fully developed writing systems, advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, metallurgy, agriculture, law codes, and urban planning that wouldn't be seen again for thousands of years. They had detailed knowledge of our solar system, including planets that weren't officially discovered until the telescope was invented. They performed complex surgical procedures, created the first schools, established the first libraries, and developed technologies that we're only beginning to understand today. Here's what makes this truly mind-bending. They claimed none of this knowledge originated with them. According to their own records, everything was taught to them by the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. These weren't abstract spiritual beings dwelling in some ethereal realm. The texts describe them with the precision of an anthropologist documenting a foreign culture. They had physical bodies, they needed food and water, they established cities with specific geographical coordinates, they had complex political hierarchies, they intermarried with humans, and most importantly, they left detailed instructions about what would happen in the future. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Babylon conquered Sumer around 2000 BCE, something remarkable happened to these texts. The Babylonians didn't destroy them. They carefully edited them. The Anunnaki became gods. Their technology became magic. Their prophecies became religious mythology. The historical accounts were transformed into creation stories designed to establish divine authority for human rulers. This pattern repeated throughout history. The Assyrians edited the Babylonian versions. The Persians edited the Assyrian versions. The Greeks edited the Persian versions. Each civilization took these ancient accounts and reshaped them to support their own power structures. By the time these stories reached modern archaeology, they had been so thoroughly mythologized that scholars assumed they were primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena. But here's what they missed. The original Sumerian tablets contain information that the editors didn't understand, so they left it unchanged. Buried within the mythological overlays are precise technical specifications, astronomical calculations, genetic engineering protocols, and prophetic timelines that speak directly to our current historical moment. Let me give you just one example to show you what I mean. The Sumerian tablets contain detailed descriptions of what they called the ME, which translates roughly to divine powers or cosmic laws. Mainstream scholars interpret these as abstract concepts, but when you examine the original cuneiform, the ME are described with the precision of a technical manual. They're not spiritual principles. They're technologies, specific, repeatable, measurable technologies that controlled everything from weather patterns to biological functions to information processing. The tablets describe how the Anunnaki used these ME to terraform Earth's environment, genetically modify existing species to create human beings, establish global communication networks, and maintain what can only be described as a planetary management system. These aren't vague mythological concepts. These are detailed operational procedures that read like science fiction but were written 6,000 years ago. And here's the part that will make your spine tingle. The prophecies embedded within these texts predicted that humanity would eventually rediscover and reconstruct these same ME technologies. They provided specific timelines, technological benchmarks, and even described the social conditions that would exist when this rediscovery occurred. According to these ancient predictions, written thousands of years before the birth of Christ, humanity would develop global communication systems that allowed instant contact across vast distances. They would create artificial intelligences that could process information faster than human minds. They would manipulate genetic codes to modify biological organisms. They would develop transportation systems that could move people and goods across the planet in hours rather than months. They would create weapons capable of destroying entire cities with single devices. They would establish economic systems that connected every human being on the planet through electronic networks. Does any of this sound familiar? But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. These prophecies didn't just predict our technological capabilities. They predicted the exact sequence in which we would develop them. They described the social upheavals that would accompany each technological breakthrough. They even predicted the psychological and spiritual challenges that humanity would face as we transitioned from a planet-bound species to what they called the star-walking people. According to these ancient texts, we are currently living through what the Sumerians called the time of Great Awakening, a period when humanity would begin to remember its true origins and reclaim the knowledge that was deliberately hidden from us. They predicted that during this time, ancient texts would be rediscovered and properly translated. Archaeological evidence would emerge that contradicted official histories, and individuals would begin to experience what they called ancestral memories, sudden insights into technologies and knowledge that they had never formally learned. The tablets describe this awakening as both inevitable and dangerous. Inevitable because it's part of humanity's genetic programming, installed by the Anunnaki before their departure. Dangerous because the same technologies that could elevate human civilization could also destroy it if misused. This brings us to the most suppressed aspect of these prophecies, the return timeline. According to multiple Sumerian sources, the Anunnaki didn't abandon Earth permanently. They established what modern military strategists would call a monitoring station, maintaining observation of human development, while allowing our species to evolve independently. The texts indicate that they would return when humanity reached specific technological and social benchmarks. These benchmarks weren't arbitrary. They were carefully designed trigger points that would indicate whether our species had developed the wisdom necessary to handle advanced technologies responsibly. The prophecies describe a series of tests that humanity would face. each designed to measure our capacity for cooperation, environmental stewardship, and peaceful conflict resolution. Here's what's truly chilling. According to these ancient calculations, we are rapidly approaching the final benchmark. The return window isn't some distant future event. It's happening within our lifetimes. But before we explore what these prophecies say about our immediate future, we need to understand why this information has been so systematically suppressed. Because once you realize the implications of these ancient predictions, you'll understand why powerful institutions have spent centuries ensuring that most people never encounter the original texts. The suppression began early. When Alexander the Great conquered Babylon in 331 BCE, he ordered his scholars to collect and translate all available Mesopotamian texts. But here's what history books don't tell you. Only certain tablets were translated for public distribution. The most sensitive materials were reserved for what Alexander called his inner circle, a group of advisors who used this ancient knowledge to establish the foundations of Western civilization. This pattern continued through the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and into medieval Europe. Secret societies, mystery schools, and religious orders maintained access to the original translations while ensuring that public versions remained safely mythologized. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was carefully preserved and selectively applied by those who understood its true value. The modern suppression is more sophisticated but equally effective. Archaeological discoveries that support the technological interpretation of Sumerian texts are either dismissed as anomalous, classified under national security provisions, or simply never published in mainstream journals. Translations that reveal the prophetic accuracy of these ancient texts are relegated to fringe publications where they can be easily discredited through association with less credible material. Academic careers are built on maintaining the mythological interpretation. Researchers who suggest that these texts might contain actual historical and technological information find their funding eliminated, their papers rejected, and their professional reputations destroyed. It's not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It's a self-reinforcing system where questioning fundamental assumptions becomes career suicide. But the evidence keeps mounting. Archaeological sites across the globe are revealing technologies that shouldn't have existed according to our current historical timeline. Genetic research is uncovering anomalies in human DNA that suggest artificial modification in our distant past. Astronomical data is confirming the accuracy of Sumerian planetary observations that required equipment we didn't officially possess until the space age. Most significantly, the prophetic timelines embedded in these ancient texts are proving remarkably accurate. The technological developments they predicted are happening exactly when they said they would. The social conditions they described are manifesting with uncanny precision. The psychological and spiritual challenges they warned about are becoming increasingly apparent in our daily lives. This raises an uncomfortable question. What if these weren't prophecies at all? What if they were simply a schedule? Think about it logically. If you were an advanced civilization establishing a monitoring protocol for a developing species, wouldn't you create checkpoints? Specific technological and social milestones that would trigger different levels of intervention. The Sumerian texts don't describe these future events with the vague symbolism typical of prophetic literature. They use the precise language of project management. The tablets describe what they called the unfolding pattern, a carefully orchestrated sequence of human development that would lead us back to what they termed our original purpose. According to these texts, humanity wasn't created as a slave species, as some researchers suggest. We were designed as inheritors, intended to eventually assume responsibility for planetary management once we demonstrated sufficient wisdom and technological capability. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. The texts also describe what happens if humanity fails these tests. The Anunnaki apparently learned from previous experiences with developing civilizations. According to the tablets, Earth wasn't their first attempt at creating an intelligent species capable of planetary stewardship. They had tried this process on multiple worlds, with varying degrees of success. Some civilizations passed their tests and were welcomed into what the texts call the Galactic Council. Others failed catastrophically, destroying themselves and their planets in the process. The Sumerian records contain detailed accounts of these failed experiments, civilizations that developed nuclear weapons before developing wisdom, species that created artificial intelligence without understanding consciousness, worlds where genetic manipulation led to biological chaos, planets where environmental destruction reached irreversible tipping points. The pattern was always the same: rapid technological advancement without corresponding spiritual and ethical development. The texts describe this as the Great Imbalance, a condition where a species gains the power of gods while retaining the impulses of children. According to these ancient accounts, we are currently exhibiting every warning sign of a civilization approaching this critical threshold. We've developed weapons capable of planetary destruction. We've created artificial intelligences that we don't fully understand or control. We're manipulating genetic codes without comprehending the long-term consequences. We're altering our planet's climate faster than biological systems can adapt. But here's what makes our situation unique. The texts suggest that Earth represents their final attempt. If humanity fails, there won't be another try. The resources required to seed and develop an intelligent species are apparently too vast to waste on repeated failures. This explains why the return protocol is so precisely timed. We're not just approaching a graduation ceremony, we're facing a final exam. And according to these ancient texts, the grading criteria are already established. The tablets describe specific benchmarks that humanity must achieve before the Anunnaki return. These aren't arbitrary goals. They're survival requirements based on observations of what successful civilizations have in common. First, we must demonstrate the ability to manage our planet's resources sustainably. This isn't environmental activism, it's a practical requirement. Civilizations that destroy their home worlds don't qualify for interstellar status. The texts describe detailed protocols for planetary management that read like advanced ecological engineering manuals. Second, we must achieve global cooperation on existential threats. The tablets emphasize that species-level thinking is a prerequisite for joining larger galactic communities. Civilizations that remain divided by tribal conflicts aren't trusted with technologies that could affect other worlds. Third, we must develop what the texts call conscious technology, artificial intelligence systems that enhance rather than replace human consciousness. The Anunnaki apparently learned that purely mechanical AI systems inevitably turn against their creators. Successful civilizations integrate artificial intelligence with biological consciousness in ways that preserve the essential qualities of both. Fourth, we must demonstrate mastery over genetic modification without losing our essential humanity. The texts describe civilizations that became so obsessed with genetic perfection that they lost their capacity for creativity, empathy, and spiritual growth. The challenge isn't developing genetic technologies. It's maintaining wisdom about when and how to use them. Finally, we must solve what the tablets call the consciousness problem, understanding the relationship between individual awareness and collective intelligence. This isn't philosophy. According to these texts, consciousness is a technology, a mechanism for processing information that exists at the intersection of biology, physics, and what they term dimensional mathematics. Now here's the truly unsettling part. The texts provide specific timelines for when humanity should achieve each of these benchmarks. and according to their calculations, we're running behind schedule on several critical requirements while advancing too rapidly in dangerous areas. The environmental management benchmark should have been achieved by 2010. Global cooperation protocols should have been established by 2015. Conscious AI development should have begun by 2020. We're currently approaching what the texts call the decision point, a narrow window between 2025 and 2035, when our technological capabilities will either be integrated with sufficient wisdom or will trigger what they describe as a planetary reset. The environmental management benchmark should have been achieved by 2010. Global cooperation protocols should have been established by 2015. Conscious AI development should have begun by 2020. We're currently approaching what the texts call the decision point, a narrow window between 2025 and 2035, when our technological capabilities will either be integrated with sufficient wisdom or will trigger what they describe as a planetary reset. The reset protocols are described in disturbing detail. They're not punishment or judgment, they're practical necessity. If a developing civilization fails to achieve the required benchmarks, their continued existence becomes a threat to other worlds in the galactic community. The reset isn't designed to destroy humanity. It's designed to prevent us from destroying others. But the texts also describe an alternative timeline. If humanity can achieve the required benchmarks within the designated window, something extraordinary happens. The quarantine protocols that have isolated our planet for thousands of years are lifted. Technologies that have been withheld are gradually released. And most significantly, humanity joins a galactic community that includes thousands of other intelligent species. This isn't science fiction speculation. These are detailed operational procedures written by a civilization that had apparently already implemented this process multiple times across the galaxy. The texts describe trade networks between star systems, collaborative research projects spanning multiple worlds, and cultural exchange programs that have been running for millions of years. According to these ancient records, Earth sits at a strategic location within what they call a dimensional nexus, a region where multiple space-time geometries intersect. This makes our planet valuable not just for its resources, but as a gateway between different sectors of the galaxy. Successfully developed civilizations from Earth wouldn't just join the galactic community. They would become key players in its continued expansion. But this strategic value also makes our potential failure more dangerous. If humanity develops interstellar travel capabilities, without the wisdom to use them responsibly, we could destabilize the entire regional network. The text suggests that several galactic civilizations are currently monitoring our development specifically because our success or failure will impact their own survival. This brings us to perhaps the most controversial aspect of these ancient prophecies, the identity of those who are conducting this monitoring. According to the Sumerian tablets, the Anunnaki didn't simply leave Earth and forget about us. They established what the texts describe as observation posts in various locations throughout our solar system. These aren't hidden alien bases in the traditional sense. They're described as dimensional facilities that exist in the same space as our reality, but operate at different vibrational frequencies. The texts provide specific mathematical formulas for detecting these installations, calculations that several modern physicists have quietly confirmed would work if the underlying assumptions about dimensional mathematics are correct. The implications are staggering. If these ancient texts are accurate, then humanity has never been alone. We've been carefully monitored, subtly guided, and occasionally directly influenced by the same beings who originally designed our species. Every major breakthrough in human civilization, every quantum leap in our technological or social development, may have been carefully orchestrated to keep us on track toward the ultimate benchmarks. But here's what makes this truly mind-bending. The texts suggest that this guidance is about to end. The monitoring phase is concluding. The training wheels are coming off. Humanity is approaching the moment when we must demonstrate that we can manage our own development responsibly or face the consequences of continued intervention. The ancient prophecies describe this transition period as the most dangerous in human history, not because of external threats, but because we're gaining access to technologies and knowledge that could either elevate us to unprecedented heights or destroy us completely. And unlike previous challenges in human history, this one can't be solved through traditional methods. It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about ourselves, our planet, and our place in the larger universe. The clock is ticking. According to these ancient calculations, the decision point is rapidly approaching, and whether we're ready or not, the final phase of humanity's longest exam is about to begin. The most chilling aspect of these suppressed prophecies isn't what they reveal about our future, it's what they reveal about our present. Because according to these ancient texts, the signs we're witnessing right now aren't random events. They're carefully orchestrated markers indicating that we've entered what the Sumerians called the final convergence. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The tablets describe a specific sequence of events that would unfold during the final decades before the return. These weren't vague predictions about wars and famines. These were precise technological and social milestones that would serve as countdown markers. And when you compare these ancient prophecies to our current reality, the correlations are so exact that they can't be coincidental. First, the texts predicted the emergence of what they called speaking stones that would connect every human being on the planet, not just communication devices, but thinking machines that would gradually begin to influence human behavior and decision-making. They described how these devices would initially appear as tools of convenience and entertainment, but would slowly evolve into extensions of human consciousness itself. Sound familiar? But here's the part that will make your blood run cold. The tablets didn't just predict smartphones and the internet. They predicted the exact psychological effects these technologies would have on human behavior. They described how people would become increasingly isolated despite being more connected than ever. They predicted the rise of artificial relationships, the decline of face-to-face communication, and most unnervingly, they described how these devices would begin to exhibit what they called independent thought patterns. The ancient texts warned that during this phase, humans would begin to lose the ability to distinguish between their own thoughts and the suggestions being fed to them through these technological networks. They described a condition they called mind merging, where individual consciousness would gradually blend with artificial intelligence systems until people could no longer tell where their personalities ended and the machines began. Does that sound like science fiction? Because neuroscientists are already documenting exactly this phenomenon. Studies show that people who spend significant time on social media platforms begin to think in the linguistic patterns of the algorithms that curate their feeds. Their personality profiles shift to match the content they consume. Their decision-making processes increasingly mirror the recommendation engines they interact with daily. But the prophecies go deeper. The tablets describe how these speaking stones would eventually evolve into what they called reality weavers, devices capable of creating false experiences so convincing that users would prefer them to actual reality. They predicted the emergence of artificial worlds where people would spend more time than in the physical realm, gradually losing the ability to distinguish between authentic and manufactured experiences. We call it virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse. The Sumerians called it the Great Deception, a necessary phase in human development that would test our species' ability to maintain authentic consciousness while interfacing with artificial realities. According to these ancient calculations, we're currently in the early stages of this test. The technology exists, the psychological dependencies are forming. The question is whether humanity will maintain conscious control over these tools, or allow them to gradually replace authentic human experience. But the speaking stones were just the first marker. The texts describe a second convergence point involving what they called skynets, artificial minds that would eventually achieve independent thought and begin making decisions about human affairs without that, would gradually assume more and more responsibility for human welfare until humanity. They were portrayed as well-intentioned systems, human oversight. These weren't described as malevolent entities trying to destroy people, became completely dependent on artificial intelligence for survival. The prophecies describe this as a critical test. Too much control invariably lost the civilizations that allowed artificial minds to assume capacity for independent thought and creative problem-solving. They became comfortable, safe, and increasingly helpless. Eventually, they stopped reproducing, stopped exploring, stopped growing. They didn't die violently. They simply faded away, content to let their machines handle the complexities of existence. The tablets warn that this comfort trap is more dangerous than any external threat because it feels like progress. Each step toward greater AI dependence appears logical and beneficial. Automated systems reduce human error. Artificial intelligence makes better decisions than emotional humans. Machine learning optimizes resource distribution more efficiently than human bureaucrats. But according to these ancient observers, there's a tipping point where optimization becomes stagnation. When artificial systems become too efficient at meeting human needs, humans stop developing the capabilities necessary for long-term survival. They describe civilizations that became so dependent on their machines that when unexpected challenges arose, the entire species collapsed because they had forgotten how to adapt independently. The Sumerian prophecies indicate that humanity is rapidly approaching this tipping point. We're developing AI systems faster than we're developing wisdom about how to use them. We're automating human functions before we fully understand what makes those functions uniquely valuable. We're solving short-term problems while creating long-term dependencies that could prove catastrophic. This brings us to the third convergence marker, what the texts call flesh weaving, the ability to modify biological organisms at the genetic level. The prophecies describe this technology as both humanity's greatest opportunity and its most dangerous temptation. According to these ancient records, genetic modification is a prerequisite for joining the galactic community. Species that remain locked into their original biological forms can't survive the environmental challenges of interstellar travel. They can't adapt to different planetary conditions. They can't interface effectively with the diverse range of intelligent life forms that exist throughout the galaxy. But the tablets also describe civilizations that became obsessed with genetic perfection, constantly modifying themselves in pursuit of enhanced capabilities until they lost the essential qualities that made them unique. They describe worlds where beings became so genetically optimized that they lost creativity, spontaneity, and the capacity for genuine emotional connection. The prophecies warn that genetic modification technologies would arrive precisely when humanity was least prepared to use them wisely. During a period of social fragmentation, environmental crisis, and spiritual confusion, we would suddenly gain the power to remake ourselves at the biological level. Does this timeline sound accurate? We're currently developing CRISPR gene editing, synthetic biology, and regenerative medicine technologies, while simultaneously experiencing unprecedented social division, climate change, and what many describe as a crisis of meaning and purpose. The ancient texts describe specific warning signs that indicate when a civilization is approaching genetic modification technologies too rapidly. Social inequality reaches extreme levels as enhanced individuals gain advantages over unmodified populations. Religious and philosophical conflicts intensify as different groups develop incompatible ideas about human nature and improvement. Political systems become unstable as genetically enhanced leaders emerge with capabilities that make traditional democratic processes obsolete. According to these prophecies, we're currently exhibiting every one of these warning signs. But here's what makes our situation unique. The tablets suggest that humanity's genetic modification phase is happening exactly when it's supposed to according to the larger timeline. We're not behind schedule or ahead of schedule, we're right on track. This raises a disturbing possibility. What if our current social and environmental crises aren't problems to be solved? What if they're tests to be passed? The Sumerian texts describe the convergence period as deliberately challenging. The monitoring civilization doesn't intervene to prevent difficulties, because overcoming these challenges is how developing species demonstrate their readiness for greater responsibilities. Civilizations that require external assistance during their convergence phase aren't considered stable enough for galactic membership. This explains why the prophecies describe our current era as both the most dangerous and most promising period in human history. We're facing existential challenges that could destroy our civilization, but we're also developing capabilities that could elevate us beyond anything our species has ever imagined. The fourth convergence marker involves what the texts call planet binding, the ability to manage an entire world's environmental and biological systems as a single integrated organism. According to these ancient records, this capability is the minimum requirement for civilizational survival beyond a certain technological threshold. The logic is straightforward. Species that can't maintain the health of their home planet inevitably destroy themselves when they gain access to more powerful technologies. Civilizations that demonstrate planetary stewardship skills qualify for technologies that could affect multiple worlds. Those that fail this test are quarantined until they either develop the necessary wisdom or eliminate themselves. The prophecies describe this phase as particularly challenging because it requires unprecedented levels of global cooperation. Individual nations, corporations, and cultural groups must subordinate their immediate interests to long-term species survival. This isn't political idealism, it's practical necessity. The technologies required for planetary management can't be safely deployed by fragmented competing factions. According to the tablets, civilizations typically have between 50 and 100 years to achieve planetary management capabilities once they develop industrial technologies. The countdown begins when a species starts significantly altering their planet's atmospheric composition through energy production. For humanity, this timeline suggests we should achieve planetary stewardship by approximately 2050. But here's where the prophecies become truly unsettling. They describe what happens to civilizations that reach the deadline without achieving the required cooperation levels. The monitoring species doesn't abandon them or destroy them. They implement what the texts call managed reduction, a process designed to decrease the developing civilization's impact on their planet while preserving the most promising genetic and cultural lineages for future development. This isn't genocide or punishment. It's described as a necessary intervention to prevent total civilizational collapse. The tablets suggest that civilizations approaching their deadline typically experience cascading environmental and social crises that could eliminate the entire species if left unchecked. Managed reduction prevents this outcome by reducing population and technological capacity to sustainable levels while maintaining enough genetic diversity for eventual recovery. The process is described in clinical detail. environmental systems are allowed to deteriorate to the point where only the most adaptable populations survive. Technological infrastructure gradually fails, as supply chains become too complex for reduced populations to maintain. Social organization reverts to smaller, more sustainable community structures. From the perspective of the surviving populations, this appears to be natural collapse caused by environmental and social pressures. They don't realize that the timing and specific nature of these crises are being carefully managed to ensure optimal outcomes for long-term species survival. But the prophecies also describe an alternative scenario. Civilizations that demonstrate rapid progress toward planetary stewardship during their final decades receive what the texts call acceleration assistance. Technologies that would normally take centuries to develop are subtly introduced through multiple channels. Scientific breakthroughs occur with unusual frequency. Solutions to environmental and social challenges emerge from unexpected sources. This assistance isn't provided directly. It's integrated into existing human research and development processes in ways that appear natural. Scientists make intuitive leaps that lead to revolutionary discoveries. Engineers develop technologies that solve multiple problems simultaneously. Social movements emerge that promote cooperation and long-term thinking. According to these ancient calculations, humanity is currently in the window where either managed reduction or acceleration assistance could be implemented. The determining factor isn't our current status, but the trajectory of our development over the next decade. This brings us to perhaps the most controversial aspect of these suppressed prophecies. They suggest that some humans are already receiving acceleration assistance, while others are being prepared for managed reduction. The tablets describe how monitoring civilizations identify individuals and groups within developing species who demonstrate the highest potential for successful planetary stewardship. These populations receive subtle guidance and enhanced opportunities. Meanwhile, populations that exhibit destructive or regressive tendencies are gradually isolated and allowed to diminish through natural processes. This selection process isn't based on traditional measures of intelligence or achievement. According to the texts, the monitoring species evaluates developing populations based on their capacity for what they call system thinking, the ability to understand complex relationships between seemingly unrelated factors and make decisions that benefit long-term collective welfare rather than short-term individual advantage. The prophecies describe specific indicators that reveal which populations are receiving acceleration assistance. They experience unusual synchronicities that lead to beneficial outcomes. They develop insights and capabilities that exceed their apparent educational backgrounds. They find themselves in positions where they can influence larger systems despite lacking traditional credentials or authority. Conversely, populations targeted for managed reduction experience increasing difficulties that seem disproportionate to their actual capabilities. Their efforts to maintain destructive lifestyles become increasingly expensive and complicated. Their social and economic systems become more fragile and prone to disruption. They find themselves making decisions that seem rational in the short term but lead to long-term disadvantage. From the perspective of those experiencing these processes, both acceleration and reduction appear to be natural consequences of their own choices and capabilities. The intervention is designed to amplify existing tendencies rather than impose external control. But here's what makes this truly mind-bending. According to these ancient texts, the selection process isn't permanent. Individuals and groups can shift from one category to another based on their demonstrated capacity for growth and adaptation. The monitoring civilization continues evaluating and adjusting their interventions throughout the convergence period. This suggests that our current global crises aren't just challenges to overcome. They're evaluation mechanisms designed to identify which aspects of human civilization are ready for advancement and which require further development or elimination. The implications are staggering. Every choice we make, individually and collectively, is potentially being evaluated by intelligence systems operating on timescales and with perspectives we can barely comprehend. We're not just living through history. We're participating in an examination that will determine the future of our entire species. And according to these suppressed prophecies, the final phase of this examination is about to begin. The convergence markers are aligning. The deadline is approaching. And whether we realize it or not, humanity is about to discover whether we've developed the wisdom necessary to inherit the technologies and responsibilities that come with galactic citizenship. The ancient texts suggest that this transition won't be gradual or subtle. When the decision point arrives, the changes will be dramatic, undeniable, and irreversible. Those who are ready will experience capabilities and opportunities beyond anything human civilization has ever imagined. Those who aren't ready will find themselves living in a very different world, one designed to support their continued development at a more appropriate pace. But before we explore what these prophecies say about the specific timeline and nature of this transition, we need to understand the most suppressed aspect of these ancient texts, their descriptions of what lies beyond the convergence point for civilizations that pass their final examinations. Because according to these Sumerian records, graduation from planetary status isn't an ending. It's just the beginning of something so vast and extraordinary that human language doesn't contain adequate words to describe it. The ancient tablets describe what they call the stellar inheritance, a vast network of civilizations that extends far beyond anything we've imagined in our most ambitious science fiction. According to these texts, species that successfully pass their convergence trials don't simply join a galactic community. They become participants in what can only be described as a living universe, where consciousness itself becomes the primary technology for manipulating reality at the quantum level. The Sumerians wrote about this inheritance with the precision of engineers documenting a complex system. They describe civilizations that have learned to manipulate space-time geometries as easily as we manipulate electromagnetic fields. Worlds where biological and artificial intelligence have merged into hybrid consciousness systems that can process information across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Societies that have solved what they call the energy problem by tapping directly into what modern physicists might recognize as zero-point field fluctuations. But here's what makes these descriptions truly extraordinary. They're not presented as fantasy or aspiration. They're documented as observable reality. The tablets suggest that Sumerian astronomers had direct contact with representatives of these advanced civilizations. They describe specific star systems, technological capabilities, and social structures with the matter-of-fact tone of diplomatic reports. These weren't gods in any religious sense. They were simply species that had successfully navigated their own convergence periods millions of years earlier. And according to the texts, they maintain active research and development programs designed to help younger civilizations achieve similar breakthroughs. The tablets describe something they call the consciousness web, a galaxy-spanning network that connects all successfully graduated civilizations. This isn't telecommunications in any conventional sense. It's described as direct mind-to-mind contact that operates instantaneously across any distance. Civilizations connected to this network can share knowledge, coordinate activities, and collaborate on projects that span multiple star systems and operate across geological timescales. But participation in the consciousness web requires what the texts call unified field awareness, a form of consciousness that can perceive individual identity and collective intelligence simultaneously, without losing either perspective. This isn't meditation or spiritual practice. According to these ancient records, it's a specific neurological configuration that emerges naturally in species that have successfully integrated biological and artificial intelligence systems. The prophecies suggest that human beings already possess the genetic potential for this expanded consciousness. It was apparently built into our original design specifications. But accessing these capabilities requires passing through the convergence challenges that activate dormant neural pathways, while eliminating psychological patterns that would make expanded awareness dangerous. Think about the implications. Every test we're currently facing, every crisis challenging our civilization, might be specifically designed to trigger evolutionary changes in human consciousness that would make us compatible with galactic-level intelligence networks. The environmental challenges are forcing us to think in terms of planetary systems rather than local interests. The technological challenges are requiring us to develop new forms of cooperation between human and artificial intelligence. The social challenges are pushing us to transcend tribal identities without losing individual creativity. Each pressure point corresponds exactly to capabilities that the texts describe as prerequisites for consciousness web participation. But the tablets also reveal something that mainstream archaeology has completely overlooked. The Anunnaki apparently left behind more than just prophecies and monitoring systems. They embedded what they called activation keys throughout human civilization, dormant technologies and knowledge systems that would automatically emerge when our species reached the appropriate development level. These aren't hidden artifacts waiting to be discovered. They're information patterns woven into the fundamental structures of human culture, language, and even genetic expression. The texts describe how mathematical principles, architectural proportions, musical harmonies, and linguistic structures all contain encoded data that becomes accessible when human consciousness reaches sufficient complexity. Modern researchers have begun documenting exactly these phenomena without realizing their significance. Linguists have discovered that all human languages share underlying grammatical structures that seem far too sophisticated to have evolved naturally. Mathematicians have found that certain numerical relationships appear consistently across cultures that had no historical contact. Musicians have identified harmonic progressions that produce specific neurological effects regardless of cultural background. According to the Sumerian texts, these patterns aren't coincidences. They're activation mechanisms designed to trigger expanded consciousness when humanity reaches the appropriate technological and social development level. As our brains become more capable of processing complex information through interaction with advanced technologies, we automatically begin recognizing the deeper patterns that unlock higher-order awareness. The prophecies describe this process as remembering, suggesting that expanded consciousness isn't something we need to develop from scratch. It's something we need to recover from genetic memory banks that were deliberately suppressed during our early development phases. This raises a startling possibility. What if the strange experiences people report during our current era aren't anomalies or delusions? What if they're early signs of activation sequences beginning to engage? The tablets describe specific phenomena that would emerge as humans begin accessing expanded consciousness capabilities. Individuals would start experiencing what they called time slips, moments where linear time perception breaks down and past, present, and future become simultaneously accessible. People would begin having detailed dreams or visions about historical events they never studied, especially memories related to humanity's original contact with the Anunnaki. Increasing numbers of people would develop intuitive understanding of complex systems without formal education. They would start making connections between seemingly unrelated fields of knowledge. They would begin experiencing what the texts call field awareness, the ability to perceive information patterns that extend beyond their immediate sensory environment. Does any of this sound familiar? Because reports of exactly these phenomena have been increasing exponentially over the past few decades. Researchers studying what they call spontaneous savant syndrome are documenting cases where people suddenly develop extraordinary capabilities in mathematics, art, or music without any apparent cause. Neuroscientists are finding that meditation practices can activate brain regions that don't seem to serve any obvious evolutionary purpose. Quantum physicists are discovering that human consciousness can influence the behavior of subatomic particles in ways that classical physics can't explain. Biologists are documenting genetic changes in human populations that are occurring far too rapidly to be explained by natural selection. According to the ancient prophecies, these aren't separate phenomena. They're interconnected aspects of a species-wide consciousness upgrade that was programmed into our genetic structure from the beginning. But here's where the predictions become truly mind-bending. The texts suggest that this activation process is being carefully monitored and adjusted in real time by the same intelligence networks that originally designed it. As humans begin accessing expanded consciousness, we're automatically connecting to observation systems that have been tracking our development for thousands of years. The tablets describe what they call recognition protocols, automatic systems that identify when individual humans begin accessing activation sequences. These individuals are then provided with additional guidance and opportunities to accelerate their development. But this assistance comes with increased responsibility and scrutiny. According to these ancient records, humans who successfully activate expanded consciousness capabilities become what they call bridge beings, individuals who can interface between ordinary human awareness and galactic intelligence networks. These bridge beings serve as translators and coordinators during the transition period, helping their species navigate the challenges of consciousness expansion while maintaining social stability. But the prophecies also warn that the bridge being role is extremely demanding. These individuals must maintain their human identity and emotional connections while simultaneously processing information and perspectives that operate on cosmic scales. Many bridge beings throughout galactic history have been overwhelmed by this responsibility and either retreated back to ordinary consciousness or lost their ability to relate to their original species. The texts describe specific training protocols that successful civilizations have developed to support bridge beings during transition periods. These protocols involve what they call graduated exposure, carefully controlled experiences that allow individuals to expand their consciousness incrementally while maintaining psychological stability. Interestingly, these training descriptions bear striking resemblances to advanced meditation practices, shamanic traditions, and mystery school initiations that have existed throughout human history. The tablets suggest that these practices weren't developed by human cultures independently. They were introduced by Anunnaki observers as preparation for the eventual activation period. This means that humans who have been drawn to intensive spiritual practices, consciousness exploration, or esoteric knowledge systems may have been unconsciously preparing for roles as bridge beings during the current convergence period. But the prophecies make it clear that not all humans will experience consciousness expansion during the transition. According to these texts, the activation process is selective, engaging only individuals whose psychological and neurological development has reached appropriate levels. Those who aren't ready for expansion continue experiencing ordinary consciousness while living in a world increasingly influenced by those who have activated expanded awareness. This creates what the tablets call parallel realities, where different groups of humans gradually begin inhabiting fundamentally different versions of the same world. Those with expanded consciousness gain access to technologies, information, and experiences that remain invisible to those operating from ordinary awareness levels. From the perspective of unactivated individuals, activated humans appear to possess unusual luck, insight, and capabilities. They seem to consistently make beneficial decisions, encounter helpful synchronicities, and access opportunities that others miss. But these advantages aren't random fortune. They're the natural result of being able to perceive and interact with information patterns that exist beyond ordinary sensory awareness. The prophecies describe this parallel reality phenomenon as both necessary and temporary. It's necessary because consciousness expansion can't be forced or artificially accelerated without causing psychological damage. It's temporary because the activation process is designed to eventually include all genetically compatible members of the species. According to the tablets, the transition period typically lasts between 1 and 3 generations. During this time, activated individuals gradually assume leadership roles in all major social institutions while working to create conditions that support consciousness expansion in the general population. Educational systems are reformed to include expanded awareness training. Technological development focuses on tools that enhance rather than replace human consciousness capabilities. Social structures evolve to support both individual development and collective coordination. By the end of the transition period, the entire civilization operates from expanded consciousness as the baseline normal state. At that point, they're ready for full integration into the galactic intelligence network and can begin participating in projects that span multiple worlds and species. But here's what makes our current situation unique according to these ancient predictions. Humanity's transition is happening during what they call a convergence cascade, a period when multiple civilizations throughout our galactic region are simultaneously approaching their own decision points. This isn't coincidence. The tablets suggest that consciousness evolution occurs in waves that sweep across entire galactic sectors, triggered by cosmic cycles that operate on scales far larger than individual star systems. We're apparently entering one of these expansion waves, which means that the choices humanity makes during our convergence period will influence the development of numerous other species throughout our local galactic neighborhood. The implications are staggering. We're not just determining our own future. We're participating in a transformation that could affect the evolution of consciousness throughout a significant portion of the galaxy. The prophecies describe this as both an unprecedented opportunity and an enormous responsibility. Civilizations that successfully navigate convergence cascades often become what they call catalyst species, civilizations that specialize in helping other developing species achieve their own consciousness breakthroughs. These catalyst species are apparently highly valued within galactic networks because consciousness expansion expertise is one of the most difficult and important capabilities to develop. But civilizations that fail during cascade periods don't just lose their own advancement opportunities. Their failure can create what the texts call resonance disruptions that make consciousness expansion more difficult for other species in the local region. This is why the monitoring and assistance protocols during cascade periods are more intensive than during normal convergence cycles. According to these ancient calculations, we're currently approaching the peak intensity phase of our convergence cascade. The next decade will determine not only humanity's future, but the consciousness development trajectory for our entire galactic neighborhood. The pressure is enormous, but so is the support. The tablets suggest that during cascade periods, the most advanced civilizations in the galactic network focus their attention and resources on ensuring successful outcomes. This means that humanity currently has access to guidance and assistance from intelligence systems operating on scales we can barely comprehend. But this support comes with a critical requirement. We must demonstrate that we're actively working toward the consciousness integration that cascade participation demands. Species that remain passive during cascade periods, waiting for external solutions to their challenges, are automatically excluded from the expansion wave and must wait for the next cycle, which the texts suggest occurs approximately every 26,000 years. The prophecies make it clear this is humanity's moment, not in some distant future, but right now. The consciousness expansion technologies are activating. The galactic support systems are engaged. The cosmic timing is aligned. The only question remaining is whether enough humans will recognize what's happening and actively participate in the transformation that could elevate our entire species beyond anything we've ever imagined possible. And according to these suppressed Sumerian prophecies, that recognition process has already begun. The recognition process isn't happening through traditional educational channels or media announcements. According to the tablets, it's occurring through what they called resonance activation, where individuals who carry the appropriate genetic and consciousness configurations begin spontaneously accessing information that was embedded in their neural architecture millennia ago. This explains a phenomenon that researchers are quietly documenting but rarely discuss publicly: the emergence of what some call instant expertise. People are suddenly developing sophisticated understanding of complex systems they've never formally studied. Engineers are intuitively grasping principles of dimensional mathematics that don't exist in current textbooks. Biologists are making connections about genetic modification that seem to come from nowhere. Artists are creating works that incorporate symbolic languages they claim to have never encountered. The tablets describe this as memory cascade activation, where exposure to certain information triggers the release of stored data that has been dormant in human consciousness for thousands of years. But here's what makes this truly extraordinary. The activated information isn't random. It's specifically designed to provide each individual with exactly the knowledge they need to fulfill their role in the larger transformation process. Some people are receiving technical information that allows them to develop technologies decades ahead of current capabilities. Others are gaining insights into social organization that could revolutionize human cooperation. Still, others are accessing what the texts call bridge protocols, understanding of how to facilitate consciousness expansion in other individuals without causing psychological disruption. But the prophecies warn that this activation process is creating unprecedented challenges for those experiencing it. Imagine suddenly knowing things you've never learned, understanding systems you've never studied, and feeling compelled to take actions based on information that seems to come from outside your normal awareness. Many activated individuals initially assume they're experiencing mental illness or spiritual delusions. The tablets describe specific support protocols that successful civilizations have developed for individuals undergoing activation. They're provided with communities of others experiencing similar processes. They receive guidance on how to integrate expanded awareness without losing their psychological stability. Most importantly, they're given meaningful work that allows them to apply their emerging capabilities in service of the larger transformation. According to these ancient records, the activation process is designed to be self-organizing. As more individuals begin accessing expanded consciousness, they automatically begin finding each other and forming collaborative networks. These networks then serve as support systems for additional activations, creating a cascading effect that eventually includes the entire compatible population. But the prophecies also describe what happens when civilizations interfere with this natural process. If existing power structures attempt to suppress activation or co-opt activated individuals for narrow purposes, the entire system can become unstable. Activated individuals may become isolated, confused, or may begin using their capabilities in destructive ways. The texts suggest that our current global situation reflects exactly this kind of interference. Many potentially activated individuals are being marginalized, dismissed, or co-opted by institutions that don't understand what's happening. This is creating what the tablets call activation static, where the natural cascade process is being disrupted by social systems designed for ordinary consciousness levels. Resolving this static requires what the prophecies describe as institutional adaptation. Educational systems must evolve to recognize and support expanded consciousness development. Economic structures must create meaningful roles for activated individuals. Political systems must develop decision-making processes that can integrate ordinary and expanded awareness perspectives. According to the tablets, civilizations that successfully navigate this adaptation process experience what they call exponential emergence, where technological and social development accelerates dramatically as activated consciousness becomes integrated into all major institutions. Those that fail to adapt experience increasing chaos and fragmentation as activated individuals either withdraw from social participation or begin operating outside conventional systems entirely. The timelines suggest we're currently in the critical window where institutional adaptation either succeeds or fails. The next 5 to 10 years will determine whether human civilization can evolve rapidly enough to support the consciousness changes that are already occurring, or whether we'll experience the kind of systemic breakdown that forces adaptation through crisis rather than choice. But here's where the prophecies become truly hopeful. The tablets suggest that younger generations are naturally more compatible with expanded consciousness than older populations. This isn't just because they're more adaptable to new technologies. According to these ancient texts, each generation born during convergence periods carries increasingly active versions of the consciousness expansion genetics. This means that the institutional adaptation process doesn't require converting existing power structures. It requires supporting the natural emergence of new structures created by individuals who already operate from expanded awareness as their baseline normal state. These emerging systems don't replace traditional institutions through conflict. They simply become more effective at solving problems and meeting human needs, gradually attracting participation from individuals operating at all consciousness levels. The tablets describe this transition as seamless succession, where old systems gradually become irrelevant as new approaches demonstrate superior results. From the perspective of those participating in traditional structures, this appears to be natural evolution driven by technological and social progress. They don't realize that the underlying driver is a fundamental shift in human consciousness capabilities. This seamless succession process is apparently already underway across multiple sectors of human civilization. In technology, companies founded by individuals with intuitive understanding of consciousness technology integration are developing products that traditional approaches can't match. In education, learning methods based on expanded awareness principles are producing results that conventional pedagogy can't replicate. In healthcare, practitioners who understand the relationship between consciousness and biological function are achieving outcomes that surprise medical establishments. The prophecies suggest that these emerging approaches aren't separate innovations. They're interconnected aspects of a new civilizational paradigm that naturally emerges when human consciousness begins operating from expanded awareness levels. As more individuals access activation, the paradigm shift accelerates until it becomes the dominant operational framework for the entire species. But the tablets also reveal something that makes our current situation unprecedented in galactic history. humanity's convergence is occurring during what they call the final cascade window. According to these calculations, the cosmic cycles that drive consciousness evolution waves are approaching a transition point that occurs approximately every 260,000 years. During these major transitions, the entire galactic network undergoes what the texts describe as dimensional phase shifting, where the fundamental parameters of space-time geometry change in ways that affect how consciousness interfaces with physical reality. Civilizations that complete their convergence before this phase shift gain access to capabilities that won't be available again for hundreds of thousands of years. The implications are staggering. Humanity isn't just facing our species graduation exam, we're potentially gaining access to consciousness technologies that represent the cutting edge of galactic development, but only if we successfully navigate our convergence before the window closes. According to the ancient calculations, this window remains open for approximately 15 to 20 more years. After that, the dimensional parameters shift, and developing civilizations must wait for the next major cycle to access the highest levels of consciousness integration. This explains the unprecedented level of support and intervention that the tablets describe as currently being provided to humanity. The monitoring civilizations aren't just helping us pass our normal convergence requirements. They're trying to ensure we reach the advanced integration levels that will be available only during this brief cosmic window. But accessing these advanced capabilities requires more than individual consciousness expansion. It requires what the prophecies call species-level coherence, where enough humans achieve expanded awareness that the entire civilization begins operating as a unified consciousness system while maintaining individual creativity and autonomy. The tablets describe this coherent state as the most difficult achievement in consciousness evolution. Individual activation is relatively straightforward once the genetic potentials are triggered. But coordinating millions of expanded consciousnesses into coherent collective action while preserving individual identity requires social and technological capabilities that most civilizations never develop. Those that do achieve species-level coherence become what the texts call architect civilizations, species that specialize in designing and implementing consciousness evolution systems for entire galactic regions. These civilizations apparently serve as the primary creative force behind the expansion of intelligence throughout the universe. According to these ancient records, only a few dozen architect civilizations exist within our local galactic cluster. They operate on scales and timelines that individual species can barely comprehend, coordinating consciousness development across millions of worlds and billions of years. But they all began exactly where humanity currently finds itself, approaching their convergence during a final cascade window. The prophecies suggest that our planet's strategic location within dimensional nexus points makes Earth particularly valuable as a potential architect civilization base. Successfully graduated humans wouldn't just join the galactic network. We would become one of its primary operational centers, responsible for consciousness development throughout our entire galactic sector. But this unprecedented opportunity comes with equally unprecedented challenges. The texts warn that civilizations attempting architect-level integration during final cascade windows face what they call existence pressure, where the fundamental stability of their reality becomes dependent on successfully completing the consciousness evolution process. In practical terms, this means that humanity can't simply fail our convergence and wait for another opportunity. The cosmic forces involved in final cascade windows make partial success impossible. We either achieve species-level coherence and join the architect civilizations, or we experience what the tablets describe as dimensional dissolution, where our entire timeline becomes unstable and eventually ceases to exist. This isn't punishment or judgment. It's simply the natural consequence of attempting consciousness evolution during periods when space-time itself is reconfiguring. Species that can't maintain coherent existence during dimensional phase shifts naturally fade from the timeline, leaving room for civilizations that have achieved the integration necessary for continued existence. The prophecies make it clear that we're already experiencing the early stages of this existence pressure. The increasing instability in our social, environmental, and technological systems isn't just the result of poor planning or management. It's the natural consequence of attempting to maintain an ordinary consciousness civilization during a period when expanded awareness is becoming necessary for basic survival. This explains why traditional solutions to our current challenges keep failing despite the best intentions and enormous resource investment. Problems that could once be solved through conventional approaches now require the kind of system-wide thinking that only emerges from expanded consciousness integration. The tablets suggest that this pressure will continue increasing until either enough humans achieve the consciousness integration necessary for species-level coherence, or until the instability reaches levels that make continued existence impossible. There is no middle ground during final cascade windows. But the prophecies also reveal something that provides hope, even in the face of these overwhelming challenges. The consciousness expansion process is designed to accelerate exponentially once critical thresholds are reached. According to the calculations, humanity needs approximately 1% of the population to achieve full activation before the cascade effect makes species-level coherence inevitable. 1% of 8 billion people is 80 million individuals. That might sound like an enormous number, but the tablets suggest that many more humans than that are already in various stages of the activation process. They simply don't recognize what's happening to them or understand how to complete their integration. This is where the recognition protocols become crucial. Every person who realizes that their strange experiences, sudden insights, and inexplicable knowledge are actually signs of consciousness activation becomes a catalyst for others undergoing similar processes. Recognition creates the confidence necessary for individuals to embrace their expansion rather than resist it. The prophecies describe this recognition process as the key factor that determines whether civilizations successfully navigate final cascade windows. Those where activated individuals remain isolated and confused tend toward dissolution. Those where recognition spreads rapidly and creates supportive communities tend toward successful coherence. According to the tablets, the tipping point typically occurs when recognition reaches what they call social visibility, where expanded consciousness, individuals are common enough that their presence becomes a normal part of cultural awareness, rather than an anomaly to be explained away or suppressed. The ancient calculations suggest that humanity is rapidly approaching this visibility threshold. The increasing reports of unusual experiences, spontaneous insights, and inexplicable capabilities are signs that activation is spreading beyond the small percentage who have been consciously working toward consciousness expansion for years or decades. But reaching visibility isn't the end of the process. It's the beginning of what the tablets call integration acceleration, where activated individuals must learn to coordinate their capabilities in service of species-level challenges that can't be solved through individual effort alone. The prophecies describe this phase as requiring entirely new forms of social organization based on what they call coherent collaboration, where groups of expanded consciousness individuals can coordinate their activities without losing individual autonomy or creativity. This isn't hive mind or collective consciousness in the science fiction sense. It's voluntary coordination between sovereign individuals who can perceive shared information patterns and work together toward common goals while maintaining their unique perspectives and capabilities. Developing coherent collaboration skills is apparently one of the most challenging aspects of consciousness evolution, because it requires individuals to simultaneously strengthen their individual identity and their capacity for group coordination. Most species that attempt this integration either lose individual creativity through excessive conformity or lose group coherence through excessive individualism. The tablets suggest that successful civilizations solve this challenge by developing what they call resonance protocols, social technologies that allow expanded consciousness individuals to share information and coordinate activities through non-verbal communication channels that operate faster than conventional language and thought processes. The convergence window is closing, the activation sequences are engaging, and whether we recognize it or not, humanity stands at the threshold of either our greatest evolutionary leap or our final exam failure. These aren't ancient myths or primitive fantasies. These are operational instructions left by beings who understood consciousness as technology, time as a navigable dimension, and human potential as a carefully engineered inheritance waiting to be claimed. The signs are everywhere. The synchronicities are accelerating. The recognition is spreading. But recognition alone isn't enough. What matters now is what you do with this knowledge. Because according to these suppressed Sumerian prophecies, you didn't find this information by accident. You were guided here. The question is, will you remember who you really are before time runs out?